So I was elected on September 11, 2001, the day of the attacks. I was elected in a special election in a Democratic primary in Massachusetts. And I remember how the whole of government was refocused on a response to those attacks, both offshore and here at home. We created the National Counterterrorism Center to improve the fusion and analysis of terrorist-related intelligence among our 16 intelligence agencies to better connect the dots to prevent future terrorist attacks. I know, Dr. Gelcher, you discussed the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, during your opening remarks. Did you, in fact, work with the NCTC prior with your work on the National Security Council?
I did, Mr. Chairman. I got to work with NCTC quite a bit.
Now, just to flesh that out a little bit, the National Counterterrorism Center is outward-facing, is it not? Partly because of the response of that day and our activities thereafter. Is it suited and structured to deal with white nationalism, white supremacist terrorism?
I think there's room to get much more of NCTC's help in this aspect of...
How would we do that? I know that many of our privacy folks get very nervous, as do I, when we retarget domestic activity, because the American people, we have an obligation to make sure privacy rights are protected, and this surveillance sort of and intervention protocol makes a lot of people nervous in that regard. And I was hoping that you might be able to help us approach this with existing resources and structures, so we're not expanding the rights of law enforcement or counterterrorism agencies to actually spy on the citizens of the United States.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So that's part of why I think this framing that this hearing has adopted of emphasizing the transnational nature of today's violent white supremacist threat is particularly helpful, because the statutory language on NCTC's mandate is not crystal clear, but it's generally been understood to focus them or perhaps overwhelmingly direct NCTC toward international terrorism. But what you've heard today from me, from fellow panelists, is that this actually is a form of international terrorism. And that would seem to, within existing statutory authorities, activate NCTC and allow it to play the role in this area that I saw firsthand at play when it came to jihadism. That role included everything from very big picture strategic analyses, looking at trends and trajectories of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, where they were headed, what their new online recruitment tactics were, to more granular issues, such as fusing intelligence across the community about particular threats, which informed policymakers as they deliberated about how to respond to those threats. And if this is the transnational threat that it seems to be, that seems to invite NCTC's participation in understanding it and addressing it.
Would we have to prove that nexus is there? Because many of these individual actors have no organizational connection, but they have an ideological connection.
It is difficult, and I believe that intelligence community lawyers should be cautious for many of the reasons you indicated before. They are one piece of the structure of safeguards to protect Americans and others against an overreach on the part of our intelligence community. If those lawyers, being cautious, feel that the current statutory language does restrict them from looking at least at key aspects of the picture we're talking about today, then I think there'd be a valid basis for considering getting NCTC, through statutory amendment, into the game on even domestic terrorism. And to be clear, that's no new collection authorities.
Right.
That's no new ability to surveil. It's instead about NCTC being able to take what is already collected under existing authorities and analyze it in the way NCTC has done, to my mind, quite effectively since 9/11 for other types of terrorist threats.
Very good. So it's a matter of deploying resources as opposed to seeking new powers.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Dr. Ballou, would you like to add anything to that?
I think I would just underscore that the fact that leaderless resistance is a mode of organizing that appears not to have connections within it, it is still a mode of organizing. It's not that there is not an organizational connection between these actors, it's that we have to recalibrate and understand how it works, much like the intelligence community did around jihadism. So I think the correction that needs to happen is within our own thinking and speaking about this to recognize that as strategic. It's deliberate on the part of the movement to obfuscate what they're doing and to make it really difficult to prosecute and surveil.
Yeah, we see that on 8chan.
Yes.
Ms. Mulligan?
So what I would add to what my colleagues have already contributed is that our law enforcement, our existing law enforcement tools really aren't well situated to investigate groups. They typically are individualized crimes that are being investigated. And so the value add of bringing the authorities that NCTC has to bear on this problem, and to be clear, there's a lot that can be done within their existing statutory framework. What they can bring to bear is the group dimension, the potential links to state sponsors, and a better ability to engage with our foreign partners about the trends and dynamics and statistics that they're seeing in their own countries.
I see. Is that happening now, Dr. Gelser, in terms of the cross-pollination among local agencies? I know we have the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and that does some of that, but is that happening generally?
I think we've built structures for it, but I think those structures have, since 9/11, overwhelmingly been directed towards other forms of violent extremism, in particular jihadism. And to activate that with respect to this form of the threat, obviously a threat that's growing and concerns us all, I think that's an important recalibration of our resources and our priority. Also, to pick up on Ms. Mulligan's point, in terms of NCTC's director engaging with foreign counterparts, which is a critical part of that job, those conversations, as I understand it from people who've held that role, have really been about jihadism, because that's what NCTC has been focused on. If this becomes part of what NCTC analyzes and helps us all to understand, it then allows the person in that very, very important role to have meaningful conversations with foreign partners about this violent white supremacist threat.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I notice my time has expired. I yield back.